I'm going to defend my position. I'm not a cultural relativist. I don't think that the United States should be in the position of tooting its horn, but I do think it's important for us to recognize what are the unique contributions the United States and the West has made to civilization. And I think it's important to understand when we talk about individual rights, there are very few cultures in the world that have promoted individual rights. The West has. And I don't think that we ought to sit back and say, oh, no, that's a little different elsewhere, but it's perfectly okay. It's not a question of difference. It's a question of what is more desirable. And I think we can certainly make the point that in the West, the promotion of individual rights, the rule of law, clearly makes these societies more stable and more desirable. And so I certainly stand by that position, even though my colleagues may not. The other point about this was the question was really, what should the United States do in the Middle East? I do not believe that we should put boots on the ground. I do think that the first step that the United States should engage in is to promote the very condominium I made reference to, and that is the nations that are opposed to Iran and are willing to put their own forces into the battle, and that is to assist President el-Sisi, to assist King Abdullah. That is something that the United States should be doing. If that proves to be unsuccessful, then a variety of different strategies have to be considered. But that should be the first step, that the United States should make it clear that there are people in this area who have a stake in the war that's taking place, and that we as a nation should do everything in our power to assist those nations that are engaged in the struggle.
Dr. Tariq Shafii?
My name is Tariq Shafii. I'm a vascular surgeon. I have two comments, please, and two questions. First, I would, thank you very much for your insight, but I advise all of you to go back to Egyptian movie in the 50s and the 60s to understand how Egypt was. And the same level, you can get a movie from 60 from the United States and movie from the 60 of Egypt. And you see how we respect the woman. We have a nice culture and everything there. We have woman rights to vote in 1923. And you guys did not give the vote for the black until 1964. This one. Secondly, I would like you guys to answer. You did not mention at all your responsibility to support a regime which prohibit or counteract any secular people who is not fanatic to have any political ambition in Egypt. For 30 years, you are supporting Mubarak's style. And secondly, I hear for 1.5 hours talk about war. Nobody think about what should we do for the economy in Egypt, how you can get these people on their feet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. el-Sisi has an extraordinary challenge on his hands. More than half of the food in Egypt is imported. The Saudis and the UAE pay a large portion of that food expense. In addition, he has an extraordinary population that is growing at 1 million people every year. So you've got 90 million people, 94 million people growing at the rate of 1 million a year. So he's got an enormous problem. How do you fix that problem? Foreign direct investment is clearly one thing that has to happen, and you have to encourage stability in the country. 22 million people were involved in the tourism industry. Today it's just a couple of 100,000, largely because people don't feel safe going to Egypt. By the way, I think you ought to consider going to Egypt because it's very safe. But the State Department has an advisory on this matter, and there are advisories all over Europe as well. But I think that it's discouraged tourism. In addition, there were 4 million people, Egyptians, who worked in Libya. They're not working in Libya anymore. And so there is a very real economic problem that Mr. el-Sisi is facing. He has a 2-year grace period, in my judgment. He's got to do something on that front. There is a lot of foreign capital that has come into the country. Chinese are presently involved in creating an internet network in the country. There's a railroad system going up right into the Suez being built by the Chinese. There's a lot of investment in the country. But one of the things that this president has to do is to convince a lot of American investors that this is a very, very worthwhile activity. So I think it can be done, but it's an extraordinary challenge.
Mahdi Afifi. First of all, allow me to thank you all for being here and thank Michael for a wonderful event and a wonderful discussion that enlightened a lot of people, us and you also, for having this exchange. A lot of people talked here about war and the need for, of course, to combat terrorism and combat ISIS. But as the US, we invest so much in the Middle East, but most of our investment is in terms of war machinery. Aren't we thinking now about education, as you all know, people come from Egypt, especially here to the US, to get better education. Best colleges in Egypt are the AUC, American University in Cairo. But I don't see too many people talking about investing in Egypt in terms of education. Can someone shed a light on this?
We invested in something called the GI Bill at the end of World War II. That was an extraordinary investment, and it had an enormous payoff, enormous, in large part because education is an appropriate investment, and you do get a rate of return. If people are paying taxes at a higher rate, you get a rate of return. You generate wealth. So I don't buy the line that you cannot invest in education. I think, one, it's essential, and it's one of the building blocks in creating a society. I think that it's very important for the United States to consider the kind of educational projects that would make a difference. When people can't find jobs and they have a college degree, they leave Egypt and they go to Europe or the United States. And so that is a problem. You want to keep that talent in the country because these are the people who potentially are your feedstock for the creation of wealth.
My question is, why do you think President Obama is so cozy with the Muslim Brothers? You just said that they're getting millions of dollars. Are the office of the President of the United States is being bought by Qatar. The Prince of Qatar is visiting the White House today, I think. And why do you think he's so cozy with the Muslim Brothers?
Who are you directing your question to?
Anyone of the panel that would like to answer the question.
This is a question that involves a lot of speculation. There's no way of knowing what is in the mind of President Obama. Rudy Giuliani attempted to explain that the other day by suggesting that he's not really an American, not pro-American. I'm not going to engage in that kind of speculation. But I think that it's important to understand that he has drawn a conclusion that the United States' involvement in world affairs over the last 50 years or so has had nothing but a negative effect on world attitudes. His belief is that he would make a great change by reaching out to the Muslim world and creating an environment very different, much more accommodative than existed in the past. He sees himself as Nixon going to China. He sees himself in a role very different from presidents in the past. He has obviously created a new pathway for American foreign policy. So I think that in his mind, he is doing what is necessary to bring about stability. In my judgment, it's misguided, but that's just my judgment. But I'm merely speculating about what the president is thinking. There's no one who knows what the president is thinking, plus the fact it's also a question of what his advisors suggest. And the president is, to some degree, quite insular. His advisors are people like Valerie Jarrett and Susan Rice and Samantha Power. These are the people who see the president on a regular basis. They have a bias of their own, and I suspect it's a bias that the president shares. So my own view is he sees himself in the position of changing the character of American foreign policy, in fact, talking about less foreign policy. His goal is to really create an America that's developed, not worry terribly much about foreign affairs. But Trotsky, who I do not normally quote, once said, "You may not want war, but war may want you." And that's the position Americans find themselves in at the moment.